here we are. Welcome. This is the Beam Exchange Grab the Mic webinar. It's a space that we provide at the Beam Exchange as a platform for sharing information and knowledge about market systems development globally. And today we are very happy to be hosting a presentation by three colleagues from ACDI VOCA. They're going to be talking about responding to shocks using a market systems or market-based approach, and based on talking about their insights from the rice and diversified crops activity in Bangladesh, which was a USAID program. So first of all, we're going to be hearing from Cuan Opperman, who was the team leader, the chief of party for that program, and is now the regional MSD advisor based in Yangon, Myanmar. Then we'll also hear from Bidowra, who is the regional gender and social inclusion advisor based in Dhaka in Bangladesh for ACDI VOCA. And I think we're also going to have a word or two from Mark Sevier, who is the technical director of market systems work at ACDI VOCA, describes himself as a specialist in private sector engagement. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to these speakers. But just before I do, one little thing. If you're not familiar with the Zoom platform, I just wanted to point out that we have two facilities that I'd be really very happy to see you using. One is the chat box. Please do introduce yourself there. Let other people know who's in the room, because I know you can't see who else is here. But there are about 20 of us at the moment, so do introduce yourself. If you have questions for the speakers, and they're going to be speaking for about half an hour, and then we will hand over to, well, I will take over as moderator and moderate questions and answers. So if you want to add your question to the list that we throw at them, please do that in the little box called Q&A. Don't put your questions in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A box, and then everyone can see them and I can share them more easily. Great. All right, in that case, I'm going to hand over to our speakers and tell us all about responding to shocks using market-based approaches.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. It's great to be in touch, and Cuan, Bidowra, and I are really happy here to be able to present on some of the rice and diversified crop activities work and responding to different types of shocks faced. So over the past few years, Bangladesh has experienced recurring shocks and stressors, from COVID-19, which has impacted business revenue and growth, to cyclones Amphen, which changed crop varieties, patterns, and production cycles, to regulatory changes, which have altered the way that businesses have the capacity and incentives to invest downstream into smallholder farmer markets. And these recurring shocks and stressors require market-led approaches to strengthen farmer, enterprise, and system-level capacities to be able to respond. So through this webinar, we're going to provide some examples of how the rice and diversified crops activity facilitated programmatic and operational responses that led to changes in the agriculture system in the southwest of Bangladesh. And we're going to do this in the context of some insights from a recent outcome harvest conducted by the Canopy Lab, where we're going to explore network changes, so how we extended and deepened engagement. We're going to be looking at experimentation and specialization and introducing new products within the agriculture system to allow actors to respond. And then we're also going to look at facilitating information between market actors that resulted in increased connectivity and collaboration.
Apologies. Thank you very much, Mark. I'm very pleased to be on this forum and just be able to share some of the work that we did. The USAID Feed the Future Bangladesh Rice and Diversified Crops activity was conducted in the southwestern part of Bangladesh, an area that traditionally didn't attract the economic investment that other areas of Bangladesh have had, and also particularly prone to climatic shocks and stresses. Our focus was increasing rural incomes and improving food security, inclusiveness and nutrition. And we worked through the private sector like market systems programs do work through. So if we could go through the next one, please. So over the course of 5 years, we worked with around 43 companies, and prime focus is around productive inputs, access to services and markets. And at closing of the program, we worked with in excess of 1 million farmers. Go to the next one. The economic impact on the program. We generated new revenue in excess of $30 million for the private sector that we worked through, and the new revenue for farmers in excess of $348 million. These sort of numbers sound large, but on a $25 million program, but it just shows the uptake in Bangladesh of good ideas and the sort of the culture of taking up, grabbing hold of something that's working and really ramping it up. If we can go to the next one, please. Over to you, Mark.
So this provides a good snapshot of RDC's impact over its 5.5 years of implementation. And what's interesting to note here is that farmer income per unit of investment increased significantly over time, while RDC's investment into the activity and investing in enterprises decreased over time. And what I want to point out in particular here is the growth of the curve from 2020 to 2021 and beyond. 2020 was when a lot of the shocks and different stressors in Bangladesh were happening, such as COVID-19. So the fact that farmer income per unit of investment increased over that period of time, while RDC's investment into the market actors' business models and various activities decreased, I think really speaks volumes to market actors buying into the activities that RDC was promoting, and our ability to allow market actors to respond to these different types of shocks and stressors that we indicated in the second slide. And as Cuan mentioned, prior to RDC's intervention, the southwest of Bangladesh was largely perceived as still being too risky. And a large part of that was because of its exposure to different types of shocks and stressors. So in order to better understand the type of impact that RDC has had, we commissioned an outcome harvest study in 2019 that was conducted by the Canopy Lab. And the goal here was to cast a very wide net to better understand what changes have happened as a result of our direct interventions and what systemic changes in particular may have inspired. So there was a focus on business model innovations, such as agro input distribution, advisory services, and financial inclusion. And we were keen to answer 3 basic or fundamental questions through the outcome harvest exercise. The first is, which business models created systemic change? What were the scope of those changes? And what were the contributing influences or factors that enabled those changes to take place? And through this outcome harvest, 3 high-level themes emerged. This included network changes, where actors were extending and deepening engagement with each other as a result of our support. Pace of experimentation, where we helped actors experiment or try new things in the face of recurring shocks and stressors. And information flow, where we facilitated massive increases in the flow of information between market actors. So these 3 higher level outcomes really represent kind of RDC's broader market systems approach in the context of RDC. And the following slides are going to focus on concrete and practical examples of how these outcomes allowed market actors to respond to these various shocks and stressors that they were facing.
Thank you, Mark and Cuan. Very happy to be in today's discussion. I'm Bidowra. So as Mark has pointed out correctly, that there are three fundamental changes that you have observed through outcome harvest study to understand the system level changes that the RDC have facilitated with partnership with private sector partners in agriculture in Bangladesh. So I will elaborate on examples of this network change. Pre-RDC context analysis have showed that the underlying constraints for this network change was such that there were insufficient presence of complementary service or product channels to reach to all levels of value chain actors, especially in the FTA zone. And of course, the inopportune climatic shocks have always dragged the commercial possibility of FTA zone of Bangladesh regularly, because every year there is one or in some cases two cyclones that hit the southwest zone of Bangladesh, and which leaves a lasting impact on the agricultural production and its growth. So what RDC did was that RDC navigated the attention of agricultural market actors, that is national agricultural market actors, to tap the unmet demand by raising awareness of the potential market, supporting promotion and distribution, and thereby increasing interest in FTF zone markets, while lowering the cost and risk of entry. Couple of examples can bring visibility to this shift in the network change. RDC have always tried to make affordable and appropriate access to finance products and services accessible to farmers and SMEs who were otherwise underserved by the formal financial channels. And in Bangladesh, only 50% of the working age population have access to formal financial platforms, which is understandable. And although the agriculture community can access the informal and MFI channels for borrowing, the cost of borrowing is rather high and untimely. So the banks were the options that were still unexplored, and RDC tried to drag the attention of the banks to the FTF zone, and the banks were slow to move in the rural areas. Their return on investment did not cover the operational cost of reaching last mile farmers. And this was a result of government's regulation to cap deposit and loan interest rate at 60% and 9%, which definitely was a regulatory shock to expand A2F services to rural population in Bangladesh as well as in the FTF zone. So RDC was looking for suitable partnership with commercial banks and try to come up with market-based solutions to address this A2F challenge. Pre and during COVID shocks as well, RDC partnered with three leading commercial banks of Bangladesh: Citibank, Bank Asia, and Bragg Bank, and to facilitate A2F channels for their community in FTF zone. With Bank Asia, the engagement with last mile farmers was deepened through introduction of a network of agri-input retailers as an extended agents of the bank. This model was known as micro-merchant model, where retailers worked as a gateway for the bank to promote the agri credit at single digit, which is 9% to the farmers. And the micro-merchants helped in primary screening of borrowers by assessing the financial credibility to minimize the chances of bad loans. This in a way reduced the operational cost for the bank, which otherwise would have been to set up their own brick and mortar retail points in the remote areas. And for the micro merchants, the nearest point of who are the nearest point of service for farmers, they gained increased business interaction with the clientele who were also interested in access to credit. And needless to say, the farmers were definitely getting the benefit of being in connection with formal financial institutions through these micro merchants. And Bank Asia continued to replicate this micro merchant model based on the success of their implementation with RDC, and they have implemented this model for agricultural customers across Bangladesh. With Citibank and another partnership, RDC facilitated onboarding of new agents in FTA zone. These agents were regional agricultural companies, and thus evidently their main customers were farmer community and supply chain entrepreneurs. Besides access to credit, these new agents offered other services like savings, remittance transfer, and utility bills, thus making formerly underserved farmers and SMEs bankable. And just to stress on the fact that during the COVID years, the remittance rate in Bangladesh, rate is soared the highest in compared to last 10 years. So one of the reasons was that the banks were infiltrating to the rural areas through agent banking models, and RDC only tried to drag that channel or the benefit towards the FTA zone, so that the farmer or agricultural community as a whole can benefit from it. So in another example of network change, RDC facilitated linkage between urban e-commerce platforms and regional supply chain distribution to promote special products or crops that are grown in the FTA zone, for example, Banglamati rice. One of the, or actually the largest online grocer, Chaldal, faced multiplied food demand stemming from COVID impact. And Chaldal's customer base is basically urban and peri-urban population. And since there was a huge demand from online platforms due to COVID, they were struggling to source it from their usual sources. So through RDC's facilitation, Chaldal could source it from FTA zone, and also they set up a food aid program for pandemic poor population. This eventually led to potential commodity trading platform to expand sourcing from multiple farms from the FTA zone and continuing. Coming back to the outcome harvest study, and it has found significant evidence that the bank partners, including others, discovered viable markets for their products and services and expanded significantly by adopting new approaches and models to reach the rural market segment in FTA zone as well as entire Bangladesh.
Thanks for that, Bidowra. On this one, in terms of the pace of experimentation and specialization, as I mentioned earlier, very traditional business models were applied in the Feed the Future zone. Part of it was a very low risk approach by firms. And what we did is, as we had a portfolio approach, where we worked with large national companies as well as smaller regional companies, the management structures on regional companies are much flatter, and decisions are able to be taken a lot quicker than when working with a large national company. When we faced, particularly in COVID and responses to the cyclones, we could work with the regional markets. We do a very quick assessment of what is required, work with the local companies that are based in the region, and try and pilot and test different approaches to responding to these particular shocks. One area that we saw coming through very strongly, and this is particularly an impact of COVID, was that labor shortages, where labor that traditionally moved from zone to zone to harvest the rice were unable to do that because of restrictions that were put in place to reduce the spread of COVID at that time. So we'd already been working with mechanization companies, again, through facilitating with some of our partners, helping them establish points of presence where they could sell their equipment, provide servicing and spare parts. And through COVID, we saw a massive demand for mechanized harvesting of rice in particular, and then also wheat. And because the companies were already in the market, they could respond a lot quicker. We were working with one company, and this is sort of tends towards the specialization side. We're working with one company that was just doing seed multiplication. They then moved into mechanization, so that proved to be a profitable business model. They then started doing input supply, particularly the bioremedies that we introduced, trichoderma and inoculant. and then eventually graduated into rice in packet on shelf. And this smaller firm in the Feed the Future zone was able to experiment and with these different approaches, relatively low risk. I think your cost to program was maybe $20,000 or $30,000 over the duration of our engagement with the company. But that also gave us an indication of what bigger firms could do. And we shared those lessons with bigger firms so that they could also start looking at different ways of approaching the Feed the Future zone market. So that the balance between, as I say, smaller local companies that are able to react much quicker, plus the larger companies who can do stuff at larger scale, that gave us a real opportunity to test and expand the footprint of the agriculture sector in the Feed the Future zone. Combine harvester. All right, Bidowra.
Yeah, thanks, Cuan. This is the third and another important fundamental change that we want to elaborate on, the information flow. Before RDC, or even during the inception period of RDC, we have seen and observed in the field that large agricultural companies that we tend to partner with, and the communication between their distribution network were situated in the Feed the Future zone, as well as with their ultimate clients who are the farmers. The communication flow is very static in forms of face-to-face communication and human interaction, heavily dependent on human interaction through trainings and field days, which are kind of one of a time event in a season. As such, the participation rate or scope for farmers into these events and to be in communication with the companies as well as the distribution network was not very, or I would say the most optimum or most efficient. So there was a need for improved information flows within commercial relationships. During COVID, transition to digital communication to address the social distancing parameters was necessary and was opted by majority of the private sector partners who were working with RDC during that time and even the earlier years. And RDC facilitated tailored campaigns such as social media, local cable networks, and digital chat rooms for these commercial interactions and information flow. And transition to digital platforms proved to be more cost-effective and time-effective. And this positive aspect in responding to COVID shock hastened the adoption of at farms even during post-COVID period. Interestingly enough, there was a partnership with the second largest telecom partner in Bangladesh who offered affordable mobile phones or smartphones with data packages to specially tailored to for the usage of agricultural community in rural Bangladesh, because they had applications and chat rooms which was in Bangla language, so that it is very much user friendly and one can use those chat rooms and application with minimum data usage as well as with videos and pictures. So we have observed that alternative channels of communications, including usage of digital platforms, have shooted up among the agricultural companies during and post-COVID period due to RDC's facilitation, which made the information flow uninterrupted. In terms of information flow during COVID, women farmers had to depend on en route channels for market information. This is a result of conservative socioeconomic context of Bangladesh and mobility restriction, and to some extent, private sector's skepticism towards inclusivity. RDC worked with agricultural companies as they adopted inclusive marketing distribution models to ensure better and correct information flow for their women clients. During COVID, for example, a regional partner, Umosol, who was situated in the Feed the Future zone, who had business in input distribution and also an outgrower, faced lack of contact with their farmers especially women farmers, Omosol recruited female community-based service providers as field market agents to promote improved rice seed to the doorsteps of the women farmers, and also arranged for buyback from these women farmers. Women farmers overcame the disjoint from the market due to direct access to information and access to input. Realizing the commercial benefit from this inclusive adoption in their sales and marketing model, Omosol retained these female service providers or field agent force to expand its business among potential female clients in other areas of the Feed the Future zone. And outcome harvest study also observed that RDC has certainly facilitated large increase in volume and accuracy of information flowing between farmers, retailers, buyers, and other market actors in the Feed the Future zone of Bangladesh.
Thanks. I mean, it's some of the operational responses that we undertook to address some of these shocks and stresses. One thing that Bidowra alluded to is really trying to deepen that partner communication. When there's social distancing, we couldn't go to the field with our partners, see what they were doing. And what we did was we set up WhatsApp groups with the partners so we could get almost daily field reports from them as they engaged with farmers or running the promotional activities. That sort of partner communication also built the trust that the firms had in the RDC program, and that trust really played a large role in terms of our responses to many of the shocks and stresses. We also luckily able to be pretty nimble in terms of adjusting partner milestones, opening up new funding windows to address specific shocks. With COVID, we opened a funding window after we've done a quick survey. We turned that around in 3 weeks, and it allowed companies to continue to work in the field and engage with farmers. So a lot of that sort of operational responses, a lot of it comes back to USAID, who understood what the conditions were that we faced, and really want to thank them because they understood the conditions and allowed us to make these responses and pretty quickly.
So just wanted to end with some additional resources that we'll make available to you all when we share the presentation. The first is the outcome harvest assessment, the full report that was conducted by the Canopy Lab, and that goes into a great amount of detail into the different outcome harvests, the themes that emerged, and providing some of the practical examples that we referred to today. And then we have another report on agent banking and advancing community resilience, and Bidowra spoke a bit about that today. And then various partnership assessment tools that RDC had developed to help make the inclusive business case or the pitch to market actors to invest in women and youth. So just wanted to share those with you all and then transition to the Q&A portion of today's conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark, Cuan, and Bidowra. It was a very interesting presentation, a lot of detail in there. I'd like to just remind everyone that there's a Q&A box at the bottom where so people can, you can just post your questions there for speakers. We have a few that were sent in advance. I'm going to throw them at the speakers now, but while I'm doing that, or while we continue the conversation for the next 25 minutes, please do put your own questions into the chat, not the chat, sorry, into the Q&A box at the bottom. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about your role, the role of the program in facilitating relationships and trust that strengthen the capacity of market actors to respond to these shocks? What kind of tactics work best to facilitate that kind of trust building?
Maybe I can start on that one. a lot of it had just been the program approach from inception, where we'd worked with the companies quite closely, and we'd established a working relationship with them already, but not as close as when we got knocked by COVID. And because there was a sort of trusted relationship, and a lot of our programmatic work was not led by the cash that we had to offer to buy down risk. It was really led to a large degree by the expertise and advice that the program provided. So sort of natural transition when we got into the COVID situation, that relationship existed, and we just felt that we needed to deepen it. And it was a trust-based relationship because we were able to sort of promote collaboration between firms. You know, a seed company working with a trichobitten dermal or inoculant company, and promoting those collaborations, showing companies how, if you do collaborate, you can expand and get scale, but also that not where you're not in a competitive relationship, the picture just gets bigger if you're working together and profitable for everybody. So these sort of showing and guiding companies to more efficient ways of doing things. You know, when we set up the sort of Bangladeshi WhatsApp network, saying to companies, here's something that you can use. You don't need a bespoke app where you've got to press 17 buttons to get an answer about why you've got a green leaf in the field. It was really a simplified WhatsApp app, where a farmer could take a picture of a yellow leaf in their field, put it out onto the knowledge ecosystem, and would get a response in 3 minutes. And working with the companies and showing them how they could use that for training, for their retail management, for their farmer engagement. Those sort of, all those different aspects really built the trust relationship with the companies and deepened and broadened the impact of the activity.
Thank you, Cuan. Mark, I just noticed that you skipped back to this slide on recommendations for practitioners. Do you want to say any more about that?
Sure, I'm happy to. Cuan already touched on the importance of the trust-based relationships, which is why I kind of pulled that screen back up. But I think a second point is considering a portfolio of approaches. And what we mean by that is diversity in terms of the types of interventions, the types of market actors we're working with, but also these various kind of buckets of the outcome harvest as response mechanisms to help these enterprises respond to these different types of shocks, right? So thinking back to the network change, the specialization, and then the information flow, and thinking very intentionally about how we use those types of mechanisms, particularly during shocks and stressors within the market system. Cuan, anything else to add on kind of the portfolio approach piece?
I think I mean, for me, a big part of it is around the blended approach where you're working with large firms and small firms. The small firms give you the chance to experiment in a relatively safe environment, and then you can show the large firms the successes or approaches. And so part of it for me is that sort of large firm, small firm blend.
That's interesting. There's a question actually, Cuan, which maybe you've already begun to answer, from Daniel Langfit. Were there any kind of pre-existing, what were the kind of pre-existing characteristics of the partners which made it easier for you to help them to adapt? So, I mean, in other words, I guess you just mentioned that working with small partners was one, but were there any other kind of key characteristics that you looked for in partners that assisted sort of shock response?
Yes, to a degree. You know, because the southwestern part of Bangladesh is hit with the climatics so often, there's a big problem with soil salinity. And we'd identified a couple of smaller companies that were starting to do saline tolerant or submergent tolerant rice varieties. And as we started working with them, they started seeing the success of it. We then could bring in the bigger companies like Bayer, Crop Science. So some of it was really specific because we knew there's an issue around soil salinity, and we worked with sunflower companies as well to address that that problem. And then, as I said, using those lessons learned to attract bigger players into the market.
Okay.
And processes. I mean, that was the interesting thing. We started working with sunflower, and we managed to get sunflower oil processors coming into the market. So not only are people growing the sunflowers as a let's say, risk management tool, but they also had a ready market that started expanding as well.
Sure. I mean, maybe Bidowra, you can answer this, but were there any particular outcomes that are mentioned in your presentation which you felt had had more potential for sort of scale and sustainability, which of course are our touchstones in market systems development?
Well, in terms of outcomes, we did try to focus on the very top line ones that is evident, but there were many other underlying currents that were flowing, saying that have the potential to reach scale. Since I personally looked into the financial inclusion portfolio, and one of the things that I have already mentioned in my example, that how financial institutions can build a sustainable commercial relationships with agricultural value chain actors and utilize or leverage on existing agricultural distribution network, can reduce the operational cost or reduce the cost of entry, cost of barrier, risk of or the barriers to enter a new market where financial literacy is close to zero. For financial institutions, this was a huge challenge. And as such, financial inclusion was is at risk in the FTA zone, and particularly for agricultural community. So the models that we were very lucky that based on our relationship building with these banks, they entered the market on the trust that other large agricultural companies that partnered with them because of RDC facilitation, they can utilize their resources and their networks. And it has proved that it can reach scale. And during COVID period, this was a huge relief for the banks because they were facing problems for distributing, especially loans to the grassroots level. And it proved to be a very successful and engaging relationship when they were partnering with agricultural companies and their networks, both national companies as well as regional companies. So it's not only my perception whether this has a scalability, opportunity, or sustainability. It has proved itself to be, because many of these banks have replicated those partnerships with agricultural companies or agricultural platforms, not only in Feed the Future zone, but also across Bangladesh in different adaptive model based on the context. So yeah, that is something I am really happy to share.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. At this point, can I just introduce someone else onto the panel? We've got someone in the room who has a lot of experience in Bangladesh in this area. His name is Bilash Mitra, and he was monitoring, evaluation and learning lead for DAI in a similar program. Bilash, welcome. I don't know if we can make you, we can give you the microphone or even the video there. Did you have any particular thing to add in response to any of the questions that that we've already heard, Bilash?
Thanks, Michael. I'd like to add whatever you raised about the scalability. I'd like to mention two examples. Whatever I am working when I start to work with the DAI.
Bilash, I'm really sorry, but the sound quality is very poor. So I'm not.
Are you hearing me?
Oh, that's a bit better.
Yeah.
Try again. There was something very odd with your microphone.
Yeah, sorry. It's basically whenever I started with work with the DAI for digital agriculture activity,
the scalability point of view of the RDC activities. So I saw that the advisory service we promoted to the Bayer Crop Science and some other companies as well. Now they are expanding this service. That earlier, whenever we promoted on the time, they had a different approach they followed to mobile-based service as well as the fixed structure-based service. But now they are trying to move forward with the digitization of those services and to the farmers, so that helps them to detect the any disease or any sorts of uh, suggestion regarding the crop management and cultivation. They are now introducing, they are basically introduce digital advisory service mode where which helps them to get the instant feedback as well as the business incentive as well as for selling the business product. One thing that one, and another example I would like to mention about the mechanization part. Under the mechanization, we had in the RDC, there is we follow the franchise model. We facilitate to one of the company to be in that supply chain network for providing the machines in the rural levels. So in the distribution network, we try to introduce franchise models. So whenever we work with the company in the RDC during the RDC period, they started with two franchise model, and gradually now it's increasing. So far, I heard that it is now 4 franchise model they already started to do the business. Franchise model is a little bit elaborate about the franchise model. Franchise model, they have a regular distribution network for machinery. By parallelly, they is trying to set up this franchise model for reducing the operational cost. And at the same time also that model, as it's based in the local level, so it's ensuring the mechanization service, machinery, mechanization service, as well as the spare parts availability in the rural levels, which helps them immediately to get this service. So that's model basically expanding gradually, not say it jump on the scale up too much, but it's hitting the market gradually. Yeah, that's 2 examples I'd like to share.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very interesting. I think, yeah, that franchise approach seems to be particularly relevant as a strategy for mechanization. Is there anything? There's a question about that. Actually, maybe Bilash has already covered it, Cuan, but someone was curious to know what exactly the interventions were that the program followed to support and develop that franchise model.
Okay, so it was quite a layered approach. The one, as Bilash says, was working with existing partner companies that had a point of presence in the Feed the Future zone, hooking them up with the mechanization companies so that they could establish that point of presence. We also worked very closely with the potential owners of combine harvesters, where we developed a business model or business plan for them to show them that, you know, if the combine was in the field for 8 hours a day, this is your potential revenue. We also used that business model to show farmers the savings that they would make by using mechanized harvesting. And then another part was that we did quite a lot of work, and we never succeeded, but working with the banks to offer asset-based financing, where we could show them the business model that comes from ownership of a combine harvester. The fail point for that, and I believe that has changed subsequently, was that the banks couldn't take out a hypothec on the combine harvester. So they couldn't retain ownership until the last payment was made. And that was where things fell down. I believe the Secured Goods and Movable Act has now been passed, which means the banks can do that. And hopefully there's a run up to them starting to offer that finance. So as I say, it was for everything from, let's say, the potential local service provider looking at their business plan, looking at the benefit to farmer on the other side, and then also with the banks to try and really try and get at scale. We were lucky the government subsidized about halfway through COVID, government provided a subsidy for combine harvesters, which just increased access significantly. I think 340, 350 combines are sold in a couple of months. So, you know, that sort of combination of factors all helped tremendously in moving the dial.
Great, thank you. Can we just change the mood music a little bit for a second? Now, there's another question here from Harry Beechcroft Shaw. Now, Mark or Cuan, he's asking about the project's sort of HR strategy and the kind of team structure and capacities that you try to develop or built to implement the program. Is that something you could discuss a little bit?
Yeah, I'm certain I can give my 5 cents worth there. I mean, we had a relatively flat management structure. We had a finance and operations manager who ran all the grants team, and then our normal finance and operations and logistics. Then we had the market systems team, and we had team leads around various aspects on that side. We had the Bilash as the monitoring and evaluation lead, and we had Bidowra on the inclusivity side and access to finance side. We had offices in Jashaw and Barishaw. We had a total staff complement of around 50 people. And what we did and tried to foster with the team is for them to establish their own relationships with firms, to trust in their ability, to trust in their capacity in the field. And we found that sort of building their capacities and abilities really engendered that trust environment with the firms, but also it really gave us the scale that we needed on things. I was really lucky. We had a fantastic team of highly skilled people. And it was an absolute pleasure. There's also in Bangladesh, there's a work ethic like none other. And that also helps tremendously. It really is amazing, the work ethic that exists there. So that sort of combination made things a lot easier to run a program of this nature.
Cuan, I'm also wondering if you can speak a bit about how you kind of embrace the culture of learning across the different staff members and the activity, because I think that was a big piece in how we were able to facilitate some of these responses to these various shocks and stressors. Yeah,
I mean, you know, we did a lot of CLA work with the team, but then, you know, the team was sufficiently cohesive that knowledge was shared amongst themselves on a regular basis, even without, let's say, any management input or formalized learning processes and that sort of thing. We did do some formalized learning processes, but a lot of it was the interplay between the team members and learning, one person saying, oh, I'm working with this rice company and they're doing this, and then sharing that information. So a lot of that sort of learning and knowledge, you know, we had some senior people, we had some more junior people. That knowledge sharing amongst the team was a really important component that came through. And you know, the other side was the inquisitiveness. The team were really inquisitive about finding new ways to thresh peanuts, for instance. And you know, somebody found a video of somebody using a bicycle and spokes of a bicycle to thresh peanuts. And shared that, and then that is taken out to the field by the team, and everyone showing that video to farmers. So it really was that sort of combined effort of the team and that learning within the team.
Thank you. We're running towards the end of our time now, guys. And just before we sort of ask a last question or two, I wanted just to ask everyone who's present to fill in our very quick feedback form on the webinar today. So if you've got any views on that, there's a link in the chat any moment now, where you can just sort of tell us what was good and what was bad and how we could improve. Yeah, there's a feedback form there in the chat now. So just to sort of stand back then from the sort of nitty gritty, guys, what can we talk a bit about, the question I had sent to me was really, what could you say about the ability of the system itself now to respond to future shocks? I mean, has the program, do you think, moved the dial in terms of the capacity of the system actors working without support to kind of respond to future needs for change?
I can have a first go at that and then maybe hand over. I think so. You know, if we look at the life of program, where we did reach in excess of 1 million beneficiaries, it shows that there's a mature system in place that is servicing those beneficiaries. As Mark pointed out in terms of our results curve, how it really shot up during the COVID environment, which again is an indication of strength and expansion in the market. My best takeaway is that I think we deepened and broadened private sector engagement in the Feed the Future zone, and those companies continue to engage and continue to engage with farmers. They continue to expand their market share. So I'm really confident that the impact will continue long past, or long past that the program is now closed, but will continue to expand as it goes forward. The companies realize that they can be profitable in that sector. As I say, the money that we had as a program became less and less important as we moved along. So again, that is an indication for me of, let's say, maturing market and an ability for the private sector to respond. Mark, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I think you captured that well, Cuan. From my perspective, I feel like to really answer that question, we need to commission another more market systems assessment to dig a bit deeper into some of these outcome harvests, these themes that we've identified. But one of the themes that we already identified through that report was kind of the flow of information. And I think maybe that's where the system is starting to really change, right? And it's starting to kind of operate independently of that donor support. So thinking about what RDC did to facilitate the flow of communication between private sector actors and smallholder farmers, or the flow of communication between the commodity trading system that we had developed, and how, as a result, that is changing the way that market information and transparency of information is provided down to the smallholder level. So I think there's illustrative or little points where there's a possibility that the system itself is producing a lot of the outcomes that RDC kind of attributed towards, but I think it requires a bit more in-depth investigation to answer that question on a more nuanced level. I see, Bidowra, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, just from the inclusivity point of view, I wanted to add that many of our the partners of RDC have been showing that how their shift towards more inclusive thinking, and initial stages of partnership with RDC or even pre-RDC have seen they would shy away to talk about inclusivity because lack of understanding of the commercial incentive and commercial drive that can result from adaptation of inclusive business. And we have seen in the outcome harvest as well as in our interaction with partners that they have adopted, many of them have adopted inclusive thinking in their business modeling going forward, which I think is a major takeaway and shift in norms in a socioeconomic context of Bangladesh for private sector partners. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, well, quick question, Mark. Is there any prospect of an ex-post evaluation or assessment of RTC's impact?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Mike. It's something we're looking into. I can't speak more about it right now just because we don't have all the details, but we are exploring the possibility of conducting a systemic change survey. So looking at kind of these pre-identified outcome harvests in a bit more detail and really understand how they've changed in the past couple of years and what was RDC's influence or impact at that more systemic level. So more news to come, and we'll certainly keep you all posted as we identify and commission that study.
Well, thank you. Well, we have run out of time. So last shout, please fill out the webinar feedback form on the chat now from me. But otherwise, just to say a massive thank you to Bidowra, Bilash, Cuan and Mark for sharing your experiences from Bangladesh and RDC's very interesting program. So it does sound like it was a really cracking program and one that we should, well, no doubt continue to learn from. So I hope that ex post happens one day. That would be really great. But yes, otherwise, thank you very much for coming along. And if anyone here is in the room still, if you want to, submit your proposals for one of these webinars, please do let us know. We're always interested. But otherwise, yeah, just a last chance for you guys to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
That was great. Thanks to the audience for
Thanks,
their
Sevier.
patient questions. Yes. Thank you, Mark.